everybody, welcome to part 2 Squashblossom. This week I am going to work on making the little blossoms. So like this piece. And this was an experiment with enameling on some blossoms several years ago. One of these days I'll make a squash blossom with enameled parts, but not this time. Okay, so the first step is to draw out my pattern. And I've done that on some paper. This is the size that I want. And I cut out a few because I'm going to glue them down and then I can cut multiples at the same time. So I always like to make a little paper pattern just so I can kind of see and get an idea of what it'll be. And again, this time I'm trying so hard to work smarter, not harder. So I've cut 3 paper patterns out. I've cut out 3 sheets of silver. I'm going to glue all these together, and I can put 2 of my patterns on here. Let's see. Yeah. So I can fit 2 of these on here. So we'll be cutting 6 blossoms out at one time. So I'm going to glue all these down and be right back. I've got everything glued together, but I'm also going to put some tape around this because my layers aren't perfectly flat. I didn't have any 24 gauge silver like I wanted, so I rolled milled some 22 gauge, and it's not quite flat. I need to, I think, re-level my rolling mill. So we're just going to tape the edges and seal everything together. I just ran a piece of tape around the width of this, and that'll hold everything together. Okay, it's time to cut some blossoms. Okay, everything's cut out. Now I can unglue and untape. And then I'll just save these little paper patterns too. I can use those again. They just get stuck on my bench. So now we've got 6 blossoms. Just wipe off that glue. And I've used Elmer's rubber cement here, and I know some of you are having a hard time finding that, and I did a little bit of research. There are other brands. Can't think of any off the top of my head right now. But it's something that I think you could find at your art store or even an office supply. I want to show a close-up. It's just a really gummy kind of glue. And I know especially those of you in Australia can't find the Elmer's rubber cement. But if you found something, a different brand down there, please put it in the comments below. It could be helpful to somebody else. And it might even be under another name. I found some different names, but anything that says rubber cement. And if you can't find a really good double stick tape would work as well. I would probably just, if I was doing that, go ahead and take the clear packing tape like I did on this one and wrap it around as well, just to really make sure everything stays in place. I'm going to finish cleaning these up and we'll start forming. I've gotten the glue off of these, but one side I didn't quite get a straight cut. Let's see, it bumps up a little bit here. So I'm going to take a file and make sure these edges are nice and straight. I've sanded the sides, got everything straight, and I went ahead and did a real quick filing up the little points here, just because it'd be easier while they're flat right now. And then I'm going to give them just a little brush with this scrubby pad. Just kind of clean them up, give it a little brushed texture. I've annealed and let these pieces cool. And actually, I use a lot heavier gauge than you really need to. You could definitely get away with using 26 gauge silver for making your blossoms. I just kind of like a little bit of heft to my pieces, and especially with the beads, I like to feel the weight of a squash blossom on me. So these will take a little more forming than if you had done 26 gauge, where you could almost just bend it with some pliers and then solder. I'm going to do a little squattier blossom on this one, and I've taken 26 gauge 4 sheets and glued them together with my pattern. And so this will show using just a different shape of blossom and thinner metal. So when it comes to forming the blossoms, really any way that you can do to get them into shape is good. I don't think there's any one way to do this. And I'll just kind of show a couple of ways, but to start, using your ring mandrel would be a good way to kind of get it started. You mainly want to try and keep the curve on the smaller end moving evenly. Sometimes I'll do these and they kind of get a little bit wonky. Kind of, you can see I've just got it starting to curve. Now I'm gonna kind of tip this inside here a little bit and start tapping on the edge. I'm going to try and bring that around. And I might just bring it back out of that dip onto the flatter surface. Slowly hammering up and down the length of this to keep that curl going. Really getting it closer. I'm a little out of practice on doing these. It's been, I think, 5 years since I made my last squash blossom. Let's see. I'm going to put that inside just to kind of hold it. So now I have all my little blossoms formed. And as you can see, I used various tools and hammers. Really, just any way that you have that you can form these, especially if you're using a heavier gauge like this. Again, if you use 26 gauge, you could probably easily form this with some pliers and some small round mandrels. The trick is just to get that seam closed so that you can solder. And if you've formed spiculums before, same thing. So that would really be helpful in making blossoms if you know how to form a spiculum, which I haven't done since college and probably should have refreshed myself before showing you. But again, just any way that you can form them and get that seam shut so that we can solder. For these that I did in 26 gauge, you can use a variety of pliers and hammers, ring mandrels, to get it formed. It's a lot easier than these first ones that I did with the 24 gauge. I'll just do a quick. Using the 26 gauge silver is much faster, and I highly recommend when you first start to make these that you start with the 26 gauge and then move up to a heavier one if you even want to. This is plenty strong enough for squash blossoms. I'm going to take these to the soldering bit. Now that that flux has stopped bubbling, I'm going to place a little chip of hard solder, or I'll attempt to, at the bottom here. Well, let's just melt the solder on my pick first, and then we'll get it. And that'll just run all the way down that seam. Okay, we have all 6 blossoms formed and soldered. And at this point, they do require a lot of little cleanup. Have to sand over the edges and kind of round these ends out a little bit. I like to take my dapping tools and round out these blossoms. I'm just kind of holding it in there with my fingers. Give it a couple of taps. Just smooths and rounds that back out. Sometimes, if you're using, again, a thin enough gauge, you can just push that in there with your hands and twist it. Oops, oh, that one didn't solder all the way. Oops. Yep, that one too. making holes in my desk though. Okay, now we can take either a sandpaper roll or a disc and clean up the seams. So I've got everything sanded. Seams are cleaned up. I'm not too thrilled. It didn't do a very good job with my pattern, with my little petals. So I'm going to take my jeweler's saw and kind of slice down a little bit at the corners here and make them a little bit deeper petals so they can flare more. And then to flare out the little petals, we can take our dapping tools and just kind of put it inside and pull back. Kind of flares out the petals a little bit. Need to work on my blossom pattern a little bit more. I've got two that are fairly close to each other, and then the third. And there we go. I was just looking at this closer, and I can fix that two petals that look too close together because the dip actually isn't as deep as this side. So I'm just taking my pencil and running it here, and then I can come down that seam and cut that open a little bit, and then I can flare those out. So here's two slightly different blossoms. This pattern had a little more flare out to the sides, and this one a little straighter with fewer petals and a more rounded petal. This one's a little bit pointier. So you can kind of see. Then this one I went much smaller. I think I like the little 3-petal one better, so I'm going to use those on the necklace, and I'll save these for earrings. And this one was 26 gauge, much easier to work with. They went a lot quicker. I decided since the pendant is going to have this teardrop shape at the top of it, that that'll be the shape I use for the blossoms. And I'm going to use license plates instead of a stone to get my color. I'll save trying to figure out a license plate blossom for another time. So yeah, I think we're going to do this 3-petal blossom, and then it'll have a little teardrop shape above it that will have license plate. So I hope you enjoyed this week's installment, Making the Blossoms, and we'll see you next week.